They were meeting in various places. They met in a funeral home parlor. They met in the Woodman Assembly Hall. They met in the high school auditorium. Just various places, anywhere they could get a space. But the need was for a church. So Pastor Money came here as the first pastor of Grace Lutheran in 1921. Right after Pastor Money came, they located the lot there on the corner of 7th Avenue and Church Street, and with the help of summer visitors, other contributors, and a loan of $2,000 from the Synod, they purchased the lot for $5,000, which at that time was a great amount of money. The church was built in 1924-25 and actually was opened in 1925. And Pastor Money's family, some of his brothers and sisters, in memory of their parents, donated the church. I mean, they built the church for us and installed the stained glass windows, which fortunately we were able to move to the new location. But the members of the church had to do all the furnishing of the church, buy the pews and all. And my wife's father and grandfather made the lectern, the pulpit, the baptismal font, the altar, and the chancel. And part of that is still being used here today, the pulpit and the chancel. Some of the altar and some of the other things are new, but we do have part of the old church with us, particularly in the windows and furnishings.
And I remember my mother saying he was so proud after he got all of it finished and went to the church and came in, and Reverend Money walked in afterwards, and he was so proud of what the pulpit looked like, and the lectern, and the baptismal font, and the altar. And all of a sudden, Reverend Money got so tickled, and he couldn't understand what in the world he was so tickled about. But my father must have been like me. He couldn't spell, and he had put H-O-L-L-Y. He had put 2 L's in it for holy. So anyway, I'm glad we still have the pieces that he made.
But the first year, there was no heating plant in the church, so they had church services for about 3 months till October, and they went back to the high school auditorium and met there for a number of months. And during the winter, Dr. A.B. Drafts, who was a charter member of the church, donated $1,000 for a heating plant for the church. And so the next spring, they moved back in the church, and it was continuous there until we moved out in about 1980.
I was baptized in 1929. My earliest memories were going to Sunday school. Everyone went to Sunday school. It wasn't a lot, probably 35 at the most, back when I was young. And we'd have an opening service, and then we'd go into our classes for Bible study, and then we'd come back and have a closing service. And sometimes the young people would slip off and go down to 4th Avenue to the drugstore and get a cherry Coke till Reverend Lynn found out about it. And boy, did he let us have it. But it's very close Sunday school. Everybody took care of everyone. You knew everybody. It really was one big family. And everybody looked after the other one. I mean, if something happened, and someone died, we'd all bake food and go over and take it to them and everything. And Christmas, we had the Sunday school. We'd have a little Sunday school program the Sunday before Christmas, with the manger scene and everything. We had Luther League, that's what we called the young people's group. And it was really the social life of most of the young people then. We really had a good time. We'd get a big truck and fill it up with hay and go to Uncle Bill's cabin up in the mountains and have a picnic or go hiking down to the waterfalls, and all the biggest part of the social life, I mean, was around Luther League. We didn't have Sunday school rooms, and we'd have, like in each wing of the church, we would have a class, and one in the back and one in the balcony, up until about 1940. And in 1940, my father said something has to be done, I mean. So they decided they would dig out the basement and pour the concrete. So he said that he would pay to have his men, he was a building contractor, and have the men come build the downstairs and all. And it took us a long time, I guess, for about 4 or 5 years, but in 1940 they finally got $1,000 to pay for the supplies, and he brought in his men, and the men of the church dug, and they put in plumbing and bathroom facilities and an entrance down to the basement. So we got started on that, and the young people put a shuffleboard, painted a shuffleboard on the concrete, and we had a ping pong table, and we enjoyed all of it. On Friday afternoons, Ms. Lynn would fix spaghetti, and we would go down for catechism and play afterwards and have a good time.
I mentioned a while ago that they borrowed $2,000 when they bought the lot. Well, in 1943, the church had never been officially dedicated, so they got in touch with the synod and all, and wanted to have a dedication with the president of the synod officiating. But he found out that there was a $2,000 debt on the church from 1922, and this was 1943. So the church had to raise money and pay off that note before they could dedicate the church. But in 1948, I met my future wife, Dorothy Justice, and we were married in Grace Lutheran Church in September of 1948. I joined the church a few months later. The church at that time was very small. We had over 100 members, but the average Sunday attendance was probably 60 or 70 people. But in 1949, when Pastor Wade Hook came to Hendersonville, he was very energetic just out of the seminary, and the first year he took in 50 new members, which was unheard of in that time. And the attendance rose to about 90 a Sunday. And then while he was pastor, we even hit 100 at a Sunday service. But Pastor Hook only stayed 2 years and left, and we got another seminarian, John Lindler. Pastor Lindler stayed about 1.5 years, and we was out of pastor again. This continued for many years. We'd keep one about 2 years, and they'd leave, and we'd struggle and get another one. Things went on like that for many years. But the church survived, although it wasn't a rapid growth. And back in those days, the church had a basement, a cement basement in the church, but in 1950, it was decided to put Sunday school rooms in the basement of the church. And that was while Pastor Hook was still here. They built rooms with sliding doors, and you could open all the Sunday school rooms up and make it like an auditorium, seating 100 to 150 people. And also we had an area where we could have church dinners and social events in the basement of the church.
Then the Women's Missionary Society started. I didn't go to the first one and all, but by the time I got married, we started one of the young women. And it was so active. I said, we really had a good time, And Reverend Hook would get the names of the prospective members, and we'd go out and visit 4 or 5 of us and bring prospective members in, and they would already know everybody, 4 or 5 people by the time they started the church. And then we'd know them too, and that's how we started bringing the members in. And it was a lot of fun because you got to know the members before they actually joined the church. After church, we'd get together after church and we'd say, well, what did you bring today having today for dinner and all? And we'd say, oh, I got fried chicken at home. And a lot of us would run home and get our fried chicken and everything, and then we'd go on a picnic. I mean, it'd be 3 or 4 from the church would go, and all the children, we'd go up to Cherokee, and the children would wade in the creeks and throw rocks and have a good time. Most of our social life was centered around the church back then.
And we used to have Sunday school in the basement. We had women's meetings in the basement. A few times I helped with, I taught some confirmation classes down there, and I remember one women's meeting we had like a bridal show, and my daughter was about 17, 18 then, my oldest one, and she and my younger daughter both were wearing somebody's old wedding gown, and so there was a lot of things that happened in that church.
Our 2 children were both baptized in Grace Church, and Gail, our daughter, was married in Grace Church. 2 of her daughters were married in Grace Church, but in the new facilities, so it goes back 3 generations.
I was baptized at Grace Church and grew up in the church until I got married, and then we left. I have great memories of Grace as a child. Lutherans were not the most popular denomination back then, and so there were very few Lutherans in town, and we were a very close group. Everybody pretty much knew everybody in the church, and the sanctuary was very beautiful, and then we had all our Sunday school, covered dishes, and everything was in the basement of the church.
But we had another problem. Every time we had a heavy rain, water gathered in the basement. There was a drain in the middle of the floor down there, but the basement was lower than the surrounding ground, so water accumulated. Many a Sunday, myself and others would gather and mop up water and try to dry it up enough to where we could have Sunday school. There's only a few Sundays we didn't operate, but that problem existed as long as we stayed in that building.
And it's funny what you remember as a child, but I remember every time we had a heavy rain, the basement would flood and we would have to go and mop up buckets and buckets of water. And
also we had heating problems. The original furnace in the old church was a coal-fired stoker furnace, but it was later converted to an oil furnace. And the building was very hard to heat, and that thing drank oil like it was going out of style.
I think it was First Methodist Church gave us an organ, pipe organ. And the men, now First Methodist was a block or 2 up the street from our old church. And the men pushed the organ down the street, the organ console, and brought it into Grace. And they couldn't get all the pipes up in the balcony where the organ was and the choir. So we had these great big organ pipes in our basement for a few years that we hadn't used. We had the choir, of course, and the organ in the balcony. Now when we got the new pipe organ from the Methodist Church, the pipes took half of the balcony, and we kind of scrunched down in the other half of the balcony. But that was all right because we had maybe 10, 12 members of the choir, and the organist and the organ up there, and we had a pastor who he would be preaching, okay? This was, I think it was Corley Lineberger, and after he preached, he would run outside and run out the front into the front of the church and up in the balcony and direct the choir.
Sunday school teachers we had some very dedicated ladies that taught the younger children, and of course we have great memories of that. And then when you became a teenager, you could be in the Luther League, and we had bought and built a parsonage that the pastor always lived in, the parsonage. And that's where the Luther League would meet, was in his basement. And they let us put furniture down there and paint the walls wild colors, and the Luther League would meet in the basement of the parsonage. And then we always had our catechism for 3 years as a teenager, and you became very close to the pastor and the other people that were in your catechism group, because for every week for 3 years you were with those people, and you did not miss catechism unless it was like life or death. I guess you did go to catechism and you did do what you were supposed to do. So I think that was really important. And
no one knows the financial struggles and all that a small church has unless they are active and involved in it. I served as the church treasurer for 25 years, and when I took over, the church budget was less than $3,500 a year. That included the pastor's salary and all other expenses. And today I wouldn't even want to mention what it is. But it's been a tremendous growth in membership and finances. So we began to think of relocating in those days. We had no parking. The church street that ran alongside the church had traffic going in both directions, and we could park alongside the church. But unfortunately, the Catholic Church was right across the street from us, and they began a few minutes before we did, so they got the parking places unless you came real early. So between the water problem, heating problems, parking problems, it was a general consensus that we needed to relocate, get out where we had room to park and all. So this went on until the 1960s, when Pastor John Hahn was here. It was decided that we would search for a lot. And after looking around for some months, we decided on the lot here on the corner of 64 West and Blythe Street. The original purchase was 3 acres. And this was around 1965. It was over 10 years before any plans for relocation was made. And we didn't actually get started on planning and all the new building until up pretty well in the 70s. But the new church was built. It was small at the beginning, the first unit. But after a few years, the church began to grow.
The guys picked out 2 or 3 properties and landed on this one. And once we got started, it was very exciting. We knew we were going to move, and we brought everything over here. And at that time, in '79, when we moved here, the choir and the organ and everything was back in our balcony still. But we've done a lot of renovations since then.
And after the second pastor that was here at the new church, we went from around 300 members to around 1,000. Very rapid growth. The church, the original, was about half the size it is now. After Pastor Lutter came, we saw the need of a second service, and just a few weeks after he was here, and put in a second service, and then a little later we put in a third.
Like he did things like Christmas Eve once, he put on an angel costume and came up the aisle, and they had a platform here, and he's up on top of the platform in his big wings, and he was talking about flying up. Listen, he was a ball, but he brought people. I mean, his sermons were fantastic, and our church grew from 300 or 400 maybe to 1,200, but while he was here.